Hello, everyone. Today, we're going to be talking about anti-vaccine propaganda. Now, the ongoing coronavirus pandemic has obviously seen rise to a lot of discussion of vaccines, and also, sadly, a lot of awful anti-vaccine arguments. And for examples of how this sort of propaganda works, we're going to take a look at the Jimmy Dore show. Now, Jimmy Dore is a comedian and political commentator who hosts the Jimmy Dore Show here on YouTube, on a channel with around 900,000 subscribers. If you aren't familiar with the Jimmy Dore Show, Jimmy Dore styles himself as someone who critiques the political establishment, including the Democrats from the left. And until recently, his commentary on vaccines followed that approach. On December 21st of last year, Dore put out a video titled "Vaccine for Elites, but Not for Nurses," in which he expresses his anger that healthcare executives were getting vaccinated before frontline workers. On April 30th of this year, Dore put out a video titled "Bill Gates Denies Vaccine to Poor Countries," in which he criticizes Gates for arguing in favor of patent protections on vaccines. And on the 2nd of March of last year, he put out a video titled "Pelosi, Corona Vaccine Should Be Affordable," where he says the following: "She wants to make the vaccines affordable. She is a virus." Yes, what kind of? You have to have a virus in your brain to think that. Hey, we could, well, here's what we said. Of course, we could distribute the vaccine to all citizens as soon as it's available and stop a pandemic. But we're not filthy socialists. So lots of people are going to die. That's what she's saying. A functioning government would fucking inoculate its citizenry against a goddamn pandemic and forget about a fucking profit motive. So from these videos and others, Dore's position appears to be that vaccines are a good thing, that they should be free, available to everyone regardless of status, and that distributing the vaccine to all citizens as soon as it's available would stop the pandemic. However, recently, something strange has been going on over at the Jimmy Dore Show. Dore has taken a hard turn into peddling anti-vaccine propaganda in videos that are absolutely full of deception, flawed logic, and outright lies. As for why this is, you only need to go to his channel and look at the view counts on his recent videos. His anti-vaccine videos are some of the most popular content he's produced this year. Bringing in a piece of the anti-vaccine audience provides a real financial incentive to keep producing that sort of content, because some of those new viewers attracted by the anti-vaccine content will become premium members or head over to the Jimmy Dore Comedy Store, where they can buy mugs and hoodies and bags and hats and shirts and so on. Whereas bands, I and you bands, and you by side, pan deal, sound, kind of you can, veil, you veil, kind of you veil, kind you band you Now, you might say, hold up there a second. Scene. You might hop up there. You say, old Maybe this is an unfair criticism. Maybe this has nothing to do with money or chasing views. Maybe this is just a coincidence. Maybe Jimmy Dore just genuinely believes in the anti-vaccine arguments he feels compelled to share with the world. Maybe he's just not had good counter-arguments yet. And I will admit that this is a possibility. A slight possibility. So, let's take a look at some of these arguments then. The first video I want to look at is titled Outbreak. 80 vaccinated Singapore has more infections than ever, released on October 6. Singapore, more a This video features Dore reading out an article from Fortune, titled Highly Vaccinated but More Cases Than Ever. Singapore shows the world what endemic COVID might look like, written by Grady McGregor. And this video from Dore is a real masterclass in misleading an audience. And to see what Dore does here, we're gonna read this article along with him and see how he represents it. So, the article starts out, highly vaccinated Singapore is battling a record wave of COVID-19 infections, just as the city plans to reopen to the world. But Singapore's 80 vaccination rate has kept severe cases and deaths down, potentially proving that living with the virus versus trying to eradicate it is the surest path out of the pandemic. Now, here's how Jimmy Dore starts reading the article. On Monday, Singapore recorded 1,647 cases of COVID-19, bringing its 7-day daily average to 1,545 cases, higher than any other previous wave of the pandemic. So what he did there was skip the first paragraph, the one that states that Singapore's high vaccination rate has kept severe cases and deaths down, and he started reading at the second paragraph, talking about the recent increase in COVID cases. So he's avoided mentioning the positive effects of the high vaccination rate there. But let's not draw any conclusions right now. So, following this sentence read out by Dore, the article says, but even as cases soar, COVID-19 deaths in Singapore have remained low. The city's state of 5.7 million people has averaged 3 deaths per day in the last week. Singapore's saving grace is its high vaccination coverage. So let's hear Jimmy read that. Oh, hang on, where is he? Oh, he skipped down to here, the sentence that starts out, so that's twice now that he's skipped mentioning the positive effects of vaccination. Now, The sentence following this one also mentions Singapore's low death rate. It says, so let's listen to Jimmy read that. Singapore has now fully vaccinated over 80 of its population, one of the highest rates in the world. No, he's gone again. Now he's back up here, having expertly dodged multiple separate instances of the article directly praising Singapore's high vaccination rate. The best that Jimmy Dore manages is showing this on reference to quote, but he does not make clear, as the article does, that this widespread immunity is due in large part to the high vaccination rate. And this is how Jimmy reads out the rest of the article. Well, no, he's not reading the article, really. He's picking particular sentences out of it in order to present a biased view of it. This is an article about how Singapore's high vaccination rate has kept deaths low even as virus cases increase as the country eases lockdown restrictions. It's a success story. Jimmy Dore, by refusing to mention the positive effects of vaccination, turns it into a scaremongering article about an increase in cases in order to make the vaccine look ineffective. Now, further down the article, Jimmy Dore does something even worse than simply selectively quote the article. He actually changes the text in order to better suit his argument. Order to So first, let's read the relevant part of the article. Throughout July and August, cases in Singapore ticked up to over 100 per day after nearly a year of almost no infections due to the city's previous zero-tolerance policy. That policy included stay-at-home orders, intensive testing and contact tracing, and a ban on foreign visitors. This month, cases have risen exponentially from 180 on September 1st to roughly 500 by mid-September and to nearly 1,500 this week. On Monday, Singapore said that it would reintroduce some social distancing measures, including reducing dining groups from 5 to 2 people at restaurants and directing companies to allow employees to work from home. Singapore's government said the measures will be in place for at least 1 month to prevent the healthcare system from being overwhelmed and to allow the city to scale up services to help infected patients recover at home. So what's happened here, according to this article anyway, is that Singapore had very strict lockdown measures and a low number of coronavirus cases. Once a large percentage of the country was vaccinated, however, they started easing those lockdown measures, which led, of course, expectedly, to an increase in cases. But since the country has a very high vaccination rate, the number of deaths remained low. The vaccine, of course, does not make you completely immune from catching the virus, but it does make it much less likely that you will develop serious symptoms or die as a result of catching the virus. However, Singapore is still wary of overloading its hospitals, so is planning to reintroduce lockdown measures as needed in order to control the number of cases. This all makes perfect sense. Very strict lockdown orders, then a high vaccination rate, then a lifting of those orders leading to increasing cases, with some orders reintroduced in order to avoid overwhelming healthcare capacity. This is not too hard to follow, you'd think. But Singapore's growing caseload has raised alarms nonetheless, because of the speed at which cases have climbed. Despite policies including stay-at-home orders, intensive testing and contact tracing, and a ban on foreign visitors, and 80 of them are vaccinated, they having the biggest outbreak ever. Now, sharp-eyed viewers will have noticed that what Daw just read out is not what the article says. And let's look at them side by side here. The article says, throughout July and August, cases in Singapore ticked up to over 100 per day after nearly a year of almost no infections due to the city's previous zero-tolerance policy. Emphasis on the word previous there. Then it goes on to say, that policy included stay-at-home orders, intensive testing, and so on. Jimmy Dawes text says, despite policies including stay-at-home orders, intensive testing, and so which cases, he snips out the sentence, making it clear that these policies were the previous policies, the policies that were lifted, and he puts the word despite in there. Now, the word despite is not in this paragraph in the original article, and this makes it seem like these policies are current, ongoing policies. He's rewriting what the article says to make it say something different. Now, I'd like to pause here and ask a question to any fans of Jimmy Dawes' content that might be watching this video. Now, I know that the response to me saying Jimmy Dore produces anti-vaccine content will be to say no, he doesn't. Dore doesn't directly tell anyone not to get the vaccine. To get it, he got the vaccine. And he says that you can get the vaccine if you like. You know, he's not anti-vaccine. He's anti-vaccine. So, he's just asking questions. He's just got some concerns. He's just reporting the vaccine news. Now, my question is, if this was true, if Jimmy Dore really was just innocently asking questions and provoking debate, why does he need to lie? Why is he selectively quoting the article to avoid mentioning the positive effects of vaccination? Why is he editing the text of the article to make lockdown measures seem ineffective? If he was just reporting the news, he would just read out the article in full. Right. He would review or review article or he was If he's just asking questions, why not ask why does Singapore have one of the lowest COVID death rates in the world? And the answer is because Jimmy Dore is trying to present a biased view of vaccines. He is producing content specifically to attempt to draw in an anti-vaccine audience. He's just doing it with plausible deniability because he doesn't want to be banned by YouTube. But let's be fair here. Maybe you rethinking, well, okay, the way Jimmy Dore laid out that one article was a bit dodgy, but I'm not ready to brand him a liar over it. I need more evidence for that. So, okay, how about this? On the 14th of October, the site Health Feedback org published an article that was critical of Jimmy Dore's statements about COVID-19. And in particular here, we re-interested in their criticism of his statements about the drug ivermectin. They say, while it is true that ivermectin is used in humans and that the scientist who discovered it won a Nobel Prize, what Dore didn't tell his viewers was that neither of those facts have any bearing on whether ivermectin is effective against COVID-19 specifically. Reliable studies haven't shown that ivermectin is effective against COVID-19. So, apparently, Jimmy Dore has been spreading inaccurate information about ivermectin, telling his audience that ivermectin is effective in treating COVID, which would be very irresponsible. However, in a video posted to YouTube on the 19th of October, Jimmy Dore defended himself against the claims in this article by saying that they were all made up. So, according to Jimmy Dore, he's never said anything like the claims in the article. He's never said ivermectin is effective in treating COVID. However, now, if you go looking for that video on Jimmy Dore's YouTube channel, you won't find it. It's actually specifically against YouTube's content policies to post videos that feature, quote, categorical claims that ivermectin is an effective treatment for COVID-19. So, did YouTube delete that video? Did Jimmy Dore take it down, perhaps in preparation for COVID-19? So, did YouTube delete that video? Did Jimmy Dore take it down, perhaps in preparation to claim that he never said exactly what he did say in the video? I don't know. What Jimmy can't take down, though, is his appearance on Joe Rogan's show. So, what about, can we talk about ivermectin? Yeah, sure. So, I covered it, what they did in Mexico City. And ivermectin seems to be a drug that not only treats it, but it will prevent you from getting it. Well, now, according to Jimmy Dore, ivermectin doesn't just seem like it treats COVID, it will actually stop you from getting it altogether. Now, if you watch that clip, it's quite funny, because by making such a direct medical claim, he clearly worries Rogan a bit, who starts saying, well, we need more studies. You know, I'm just my guy, don't listen to me about health stuff. Rogan's clearly also worried about the wrath of the YouTube censors. And speaking of Jimmy Dore's last video, YouTube's new censorship rampage over vaccines starts out with Dore making a rather embarrassing error. And I wish I had Glenn Greenwald on to talk about this with me, but the irony here is that inside this article, talking about how YouTube's gonna stop misinformation about vaccines, it includes misinformation about vaccines. This is from the app. This will not be censored at Twitter. This will not be censored at. This is misinformation. That is not true. Scientists do not say that the vaccines will end the COVID-19 pandemic. That is not what they say. Do you want to know what they say? COVID-19 want to be eradicated. Who says that? The WHO. The WHO. The World Health Organization says that. The app is misinforming you. So do you understand why there shouldn't be censorship ever? So Dore first shows this article from the app which states that scientists say public acceptance of free immunizations will end the COVID-19 pandemic. Then he shows this article from the Hill.com which states global health experts say COVID-19 want to be eradicated. Now Dore treats these quotes as if they were contradictory and goes on for several minutes about how this proves the press is lying to you and you can't. censor independent voices like him, and so on. So there you are, several views and what to do, well, why are they to do, well, However, he's made a mistake here because these two quotes are not contradictory. Ending the current COVID-19 pandemic can be done without eradicating COVID-19 because the word pandemic describes the state, not the existence of the virus. With sufficient resistance to the virus, the worldwide pandemic would end, even if the virus itself continues to circulate. And one of the best ways to increase a population's resistance to the virus is widespread vaccination. Now you'd think Jimmy Dore would know this, since as we saw earlier, he stated last year that distributing the vaccine to all citizens as soon as it's available would stop the pandemic. Now this either means that Jimmy Dore believes that ending the pandemic necessarily entails entirely wiping out the virus, and I don't believe he's that clueless, or it means that he did understand that widespread vaccination could end the pandemic as he stated, and he's just decided to forget that information for some reason. Next up, I want to give an example of how bad scientific practices can give rise to anti-vaccine myths. So let's start with the Jimmy Dore video study vaccines being administered incorrectly, and we will track this claim back to the source. So in this video, Jimmy Dore is arguing that the way COVID-19 vaccines are administered is incorrect and dangerous, and he does this by watching and repeating the arguments of a different YouTube video that being inadvertent intravenous injections from a YouTuber called different Jody, the Yoi, Hayan, Bio, 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 In that video, Campbell, is reading out the study intravenous injection of coronavirus disease 2019 mRNA vaccine can induce acute myopericarditis in mouse model. So what did this study investigate? Well, the COVID-19 vaccine is an intramuscular or injection, meaning it's injected into a muscle, typically the deltoid. This study attempts to discover what would happen with an intravenous or IV injection of the vaccine, meaning it's injected directly into the bloodstream. So they injected some mice with the vaccine, some with injections, some with IV injections. Later, they dissected the mice, the poor mice, and they report that they found myopericarditis in the IV group, myopericarditis being an inflammation of parts of the heart. So the conclusion this far would seem to be that IV injection of the vaccine can be bad for the heart. Emphasis on seem to be. Please do not actually make any conclusions right now. Stick with me to the end of this bit. Trust me, there is a twist up ahead. Now, of course, in humans, the vaccine is injected in a muscle and not intravenously. So we might say, what's the problem, right? Just don't inject it intravenously and we okay. But what the authors of this study are concerned about is the possibility of an accidental intravenous injection. So the person administering the injection aims to inject the vaccine into a muscle, but accidentally injects it into the bloodstream. And they recommend blood aspiration as a way to avoid this possibility. Now aspiration is the drawing back of the syringe plunger after insertion to check if any blood flows back into the needle, basically. They recommend this as a way for the person administering the vaccine to make sure they re-injecting in the right place. However, the World Health Organization and the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention do not recommend aspiration during the administration of the vaccine because the size of the needle and the size of the blood vessels at the site of injection mean that it's an unnecessary practice, they say. The CATE guidance on vaccine administration states that aspiration before injection of vaccines or toxoids is not necessary because no large blood vessels are present at the recommended injection sites. If this is true, it means that there is no way to accidentally replicate the sort of intentional intravenous injection seen in the experiment with the mice. So since they consider it unnecessary and it also leads to more painful injections, they recommend against it. Now it needs to be made very clear here that this study did not find evidence of accidental intravenous injections of any COVID-19 vaccine. That's not what the study was about. They treated it as a hypothetical possibility and then sought to investigate what would happen as a result. For evidence of the possibility of accidental intravenous injection, they point to a study called Blood Aspiration During an Injection, a self-reporting study of nurses who were asked questions about blood aspiration. But I find this kind of tenuous. That study concerns all intramuscular medical injections, not just vaccine injections, in different parts of the body, not just where vaccines are usually administered, and it had an incredibly small sample size, being, quote, limited to nurses in one small community hospital and one state university. The study did not survey all the nurses in these settings. As a result, the sample may not represent the population of nurses practicing and cannot be generalized. So what do we have here then? Well, we have one study arguing in favor of aspiration during vaccine injections versus the generally accepted guidelines stating that it's unnecessary. Phrasing this extremely generously to the authors of the study, we could say that some medical professionals recommend aspiration for vaccine injections and some don't. So how do we get from here to Jimmy Dore stating outright that they re-administering the jabs incorrectly? And now we find out they re-administering the jabs incorrectly. Jimmy Dore has taken it upon himself to settle the argument here, and he's done it seemingly at random. He's picked the side that agrees with him, funnily enough, and said they really ones who are correct here, based upon no evidence other than what he would like to be true, it seems. Now it might shock you to hear this, but I disagree with Jimmy Dore here. By itself I don't find this study credible, but unlike Jimmy Dore, I have an actual reason for thinking that. So this paper was linked to onpubia.com, which is a website for discussion, review of scientific publications. And the top comment is from Elizabeth Bick. Now, Elizabeth Bick has a Wikipedia page, and allow me to quote briefly from that. Elizabeth Bick is a Dutch microbiologist and scientific integrity consultant. Bick is known for her work detecting photomanipulation in scientific publications and identifying over 4,000 potential cases of improper research conduct. So Elizabeth Bick and the other commenters on Pupia have some concerns about this paper, and allow me to relay a few of those. Firstly, there's some discussion about the amount of vaccine that the mice were administered, with Bick estimating that the mice received a dose that was relative to their body weight between 50 with 500 times the dose which is given to a human. However, another comment points out that due to the metabolic differences between mice and humans, the relative difference in dosage would actually be that extreme. However, they still estimate that it would be multiple times the dose given to a human. Now I don't know anything about the relative metabolic rates of mice and men, I'm afraid. So I'm gonna call this a wash. You know, it's a possible overdose. But I can't say conclusively because I just don't know. I have no way to fairly decide one way or the other here. So next up, and more conclusively, the commenters claim the strain of lab mice that were used in the study are apparently prone to the sort of heart problems that the study was looking for. And I quote, pericardial fibrosis and mineralization is a common background finding in healthy bulb mice, as any pathologist with mouse experience can attest. The lesions shown in figures 1 and 2 show pericardial fibrosis and calcification 1 or 2 days after vaccination, which seems incredibly fast. It usually takes 5 days to see this extent of fibrosis. And other commenters chimed in supporting these claims, with on stating, this paper reports what appears to be naturally occurring pericardial lesions in bulb mice. It's essentially impossible to get such advanced lesions in Oneminis 2 days post-injection. Now, if this were true, if this study really is just showing what were already existing heart issues in these mice, why is the study reporting that they were found more often in the intravenous group? What a mystery we have here. Well, let's attempt to solve it. And we'll start with our very basic hypothesis. What if the authors of this study just mixed the mice up? You know, what if it was that simple? So, let's investigate, if only to disprove this hypothesis. Now, this study includes lots of pictures of dead and dissected mice, which do not worry, I will not be showing here. What I will be showing is scans of their heart tissue, such as this one, figure 2, which shows, quote, blue-stained thickened visceral pericardium over the right atrium and ventricle at 1 to pi of vaccine, which became more prominent at 2 pi, that's days post-injection there. So, this scan in figure 2.0 shows a heart from the group which was given the intravenous mRNA vaccine, and the authors identify what they say are problems with it. So, let's take a look at how this compares to a scan of a heart from the group of mice who were given the intramuscular injection. So, this is figure 5 from the section titled mRNA vaccine administration only induced mild myocardial congestion and edema. And this particular scan in figure 5 is from a mouse who received an IM injection instead of an IV injection and thus has fewer heart problems apparently. And let's take a look at these side by side. So, IV mouse on the left, IM mouse on the right. Except, and IV always wanted to do this, computer enhance, rotate right image 115 degrees, combine. And would you look at that, This is the same image right here. These heart scans are cited both to show the damage caused by intravenous injection and the relative lack of damage caused by intramuscular injection, but it's the same scan. This is the same mouse. So, what happened here then? Well, to put it in scientific terms, they balled it up. This same sample is marked both vaccine TWAD-PI and vaccine TWAD-PI, which were the two groups the study was seeking to compare. So, they've mixed something up somewhere, clearly. And props to Elizabeth Bick and the commenters over at Puppia for spotting this, of course. Now, what this means is that the results of this study are suspect now. How many other samples did the authors of this study accidentally put in the wrong groups? I don't know, and nor does John Campbell or Jimmy Dore. All we can conclusively learn from this study is that the study should probably be performed again. Now, to be fair, you might argue that maybe I'm overplaying this one mistake. After all, it is only one mistake, and another counter-argument could be that the strain of mouse doesn't matter too much either, even if they are prone to heart problems, because with a large enough sample size, those problems and the occasional mistake wouldn't impact the overall data too much. It would all come out in the wash. So, what sort of group sizes are we looking at with these mice? Well, 6 mice, for instance, in the TWAD-PI group. So, and this is something important to remember beyond this one study, by the way, if you ever hear that this or that was found in 50 off-tested mice, that could be only 3 mice, one of which in this particular study ended up in the wrong group somehow. What we're seeing here is bad science getting picked up and repeated by anti-vaccine propagandists. Jimmy Dore and John Campbell, between them, have 2 million YouTube subscribers, and their videos using this study to claim vaccines are being administered incorrectly have hundreds of thousands of views. And a lot of those viewers are gonna go away, and all they'll remember and possibly repeat to other people is, well, I saw a video about a study that said vaccines damage your heart. Pointing out the fact that there were major problems with the study is all well and good, but it feels like the damage has already been done at this point. Now, just to be clear here, this study is rubbish, but I don't mean to give the impression that an accidental intravenous injection is completely impossible. Of course, as with all medical procedures, mistakes can and do happen. And with millions of vaccinations being carried out, it would be unreasonable to assume that no mistakes occur anywhere. And if some more rigorous studies than this one led to a change in the way the medical community at large administers vaccines, I would have no criticism of that. And if further, even more rigorous studies were then carried out and the medical community changed back to the current way of administering vaccines, I'd have no criticism of that either. Medical science, like all science, changes and updates as we learn new information. It's not some hypocrisy. It's not some trick being played on us. It's just the way science happens. Anyway, let's move on and look at another video. So this is vac side effect, sudden hearing loss reported. And here, Jimmy Dore falls into that most classic of argumentative pitfalls, the correlation versus causation misunderstanding. So, the portion of this video that is actually about hearing loss is mostly just you're watching a news report from AB 15 about some people who reported experiencing tinnitus after being vaccinated against COVID-19. A lot of Dore's videos consist of him just watching other videos and making faces at them actually. Now then, we need to be careful and responsible when investigating and reporting this sort of thing. You see, the issue here is one of scale. It might be that you can find 217 people in Arizona, say, who reported tinnitus after being vaccinated. But Arizona has a population of millions of people, And if an area healthcare system vaccinates millions of people, that is a huge data set to pull from. And tinnitus can have several possible causes: sinus congestion, stress, anxiety, high blood pressure, and so on. Out of millions of people, we'd expect some of those people to report tinnitus anyway on just an average week with no vaccinations whatsoever. So, this could just be a coincidence, right? They could be incorrectly identifying the cause of their tinnitus as the recent vaccination due to nothing more than unfortunate timing. And let's do a thought experiment here. Let's imagine that millions of people in a country are asked to go to a medical facility and have a doctor or nurse click their fingers in front of that person's face. That's all. Then they leave and go about their lives. So, the basic framework of how we currently vaccinating people only without the vaccinations, just a finger click. Now, of those millions of people, some of them will develop tinnitus in the following week. Some of them will experience headaches. Some of them will have a heart attack or a stroke, and some of them will die. But none of that will have anything at all to do with the finger click. It would be a coincidence. Because we have millions of people experiencing an event, we have millions of chances for tinnitus and headaches and heart attacks to happen. But people, as a rule, aren't very good at thinking in terms of very large numbers. You'd only need a dozen or so people having heart attacks within a week of the finger click to build an alarmist narrative about finger clicks causing heart attacks or whatever. But they wouldn't, of course. It would be entirely coincidental. What you would need to start to prove a link between finger clicks and heart attacks is an elevated number of heart attacks relative to what we would usually expect. By itself, any one case is just anecdotal evidence. For instance, Nicki Minaj's cousin's friend says his testicles swelled up after getting vaccinated. Does that anecdotal evidence prove that vaccines make your testicles swell? No, it doesn't. By themselves, Nicki Minaj's cousin's friends, St. Bowles can't tell us anything about the COVID-19 vaccine. When reporting things like this, it's better to cite actual medical studies looking for a direct link between vaccines and various symptoms instead of relying on individual anecdotal evidence. It's also not good to put that anecdotal evidence in a video titled "Vax Side Effect" as if it's already been settled. Now, I'm sure that right now you're all saying, hold up there, scene. Hold up for sure that right now you real say they only COVID-19 as a respiratory illness can cause sinus problems and therefore tinnitus. And it does so at much higher rates than among those who reported tinnitus after being vaccinated. And this is especially true of the Delta variant, which has been shown to more greatly affect the upper respiratory tract. So this is all moot, right? If you want to avoid getting tinnitus, it's still better to be vaccinated than not. And you rewrite to say all that. Well done. A few anecdotal cases of tinnitus not proven to be linked to the vaccine is no argument whatsoever against the vaccine. It does not stand up to scrutiny. But here's where we need to talk about the way in which conspiracy theories are delivered from the conspiracy theorist to their audience, which is what is happening here. Because the issue is that this video is not supposed to stand up to scrutiny. None of these videos are supposed to stand up to scrutiny. They all meet to be only a single piece of evidence in this. An overwhelming barrage of relentless sort of evidence. It doesn't matter if you disprove one piece of evidence because there's just so much of it and all of it comes with plausible deniability. Jimmy Dore's grift works by producing an extremely large amount of air quotes evidence, none of which, when examined closely, will stand up. But taken together, it gives the impression that there must be some sort of point here, right? This is the quantity, not quality style of argument. If you don't like one argument, I've got another. And if you don't like that argument, I've got another. And so on and so forth until you just run out of energy to refute all of this. And if you ever do manage to pin the conspiracy theorist down on one particular irrefutable point, they all just lie and claim they never said what they said. Like we saw Jimmy Dore do with his statements about ivermectin. And unfortunately, one result of anti-vaccine propaganda like this is that misled people end up getting seriously sick and possibly dying. And here, I'd like to be careful to make a distinction between anti-vaccine propagandists and people who we call vaccine hesitant. The majority of vaccinated people fall into the vaccine hesitant camp. They aren't committed to opposing vaccines, they just aren't sure what is the safest course of action. Of course, the safest course of action is to be vaccinated, and the vaccine hesitant have undoubtedly heard a lot of positive things about vaccines, but they've also probably heard a fair few vaccine lies, like those given a platform by people like Jimmy Dore. Now, Dore himself is even pushing anti-vaccine conspiracies for ideological reasons, I don't think. I don't think he actually has any opinions, to be honest. He's just someone who's willing to cash in on a trend, even if it ends up getting people killed. Anyway, one way the vaccine hesitant group is targeted by the propagandists is by exploiting a distrust of authority. Vaccine hesitant people might not have much trust in the political system in which they live, and that can be for very valid reasons. Beyond the usual reasons to distrust people in power, with regards to the pandemic, we've seen them giving inaccurate or contradictory medical advice, making promises they can't keep, not following their own lockdown regulations, and so on. There is a lot to criticize there. And there's also a lot to criticize the pharmaceutical industry for, and this is particularly true in the United States, where there is an entirely understandable skepticism of their for-profit healthcare system. So it's easy for the propagandists to point to all this hypocrisy, corruption, and incompetence, and then try to marry that to the science of vaccination. See, these powerful people are clueless and corrupt and untrustworthy, and they retelling you to get vaccinated. So the conclusion, either spoken directly or left implied, is that vaccination must therefore be equally suspect. America's Dr. Sanjay Gupta asks Anthony Fauci about this exact study and whether he's considered natural immunity as a factor, and Fauci said, "No, haven't really thought about that. There was a study that came out of Israel about natural immunity, And basically the headline was that natural immunity provides a lot of protection, even better than the vaccines alone. What are people to make of that? So as we talk about vaccine mandates, I get calls all the time. People say, I've already had COVID and I'm protected, and now the study says maybe even more protected than the vaccine alone. Should they also get the vaccine? How do you make the case to them? You know, that's a really good point, Sanjay. I don't have a really firm answer for you on that. Which is absolutely absurd that someone of Fossey's acumen with his expertise would not have considered this, and it really is further evidence that he will only consider a big pharma-directed solution, if we can even call it a solution. Because he's not that much of a hack. He's not that stupid. He knows exactly what he's doing, and they don't want to consider this because it destroys the big pharma agenda. So that was journalist Max Blumenthal there, talking to Jimmy Dore in the video. Fossey has no answer why vax people with natural immunity, which appears to show the medical advisor to the president, Dr. Anthony Fauci, having no answer to why people who have had COVID before and recovered should still get vaccinated. And Blumenthal makes the case that this is a profit-motivated decision on behalf of Big Pharma to sell more vaccines or something. Except that clip was cut a little oddly there. I'm sure you noticed. You see, Fauci says he does have a firm answer, but then he does keep talking and gives an answer to the question. You know, that's a really good point, Sanjay. I don't have a really firm answer for you on that. That's something that we're going to have to discuss regarding the durability of the response. The only thing the paper from Israel did tell you is whether or not as high as the protection is with natural infection. What's the durability compared to the durability of a vaccine? So it is conceivable that you got infected, you re-protected, but you may not be protected for an indefinite period of time. So one reason that people who have had COVID before should still get vaccinated, Fauci argues, is because we aren't yet sure about the length of time immunity resulting from an infection of COVID might last. So in that case, it's still better to also get the vaccine just to be safe. Dore and Blumenthal used this one instance of Fauci saying he does have a firm answer to imply that there are no firm answers to this question beyond the greed of the pharmaceutical industry. But this is not the case. There are answers to this question, regardless of what Fauci said in an interview one time. You know, are they actually interested in answering this question, or are they just trying to make Fauci look silly? So let's have a think about this question. Blumenthal and Dore make the case that a study came out that says so-called natural immunity is better than vaccine immunity, so why should people who have so-called natural immunity still get the vaccine? You know, beyond the one reason that we've already seen, that we aren't sure how long this immunity lasts. Now, firstly, I'd answer. There are undoubtedly a lot of people out there who think that they already caught COVID-19, but haven't. If someone you in close contact with catches it and then you feel sick around the same time, you might just assume you have it too and not bother to get tested. But some of those cases are going to be colds, flus, or other illnesses. People who have misdiagnosed themselves with COVID-19 and they unknowingly walking around today with no immunity, air quotes, natural or otherwise. Secondly, tests for COVID can give false positives. There are also undoubtedly a lot of people walking around today who assume they had COVID because they tested for it and received a false positive result. Relative to the whole population, this want to be many people, but it will still be a significant amount. Thirdly, the study mentioned in Blumenthal and Dore's video, the one they used to argue that immunity from catching COVID is better than vaccine immunity, might be wrong. Blumenthal mentions in the video that he tweeted about the article, so we went and found it, and here it is. Bombshell preprint study of 76,000 COVID subjects demonstrated that natural immunity, so on and so forth. Then seven Now, what you might notice here is the word preprint. What you might there the rare word. The study mentioned is comparing SARS-CoV-2 to natural immunity to vaccine-induced immunity, reinfections versus breakthrough infections. And if we go to where the study's hosted, right underneath the title it says, this article is a preprint and has not been peer-reviewed. It reports new medical research that has yet to be evaluated and so should not be used to guide clinical practice. And if we click on that "What does this mean?" link, we get a page explaining that preprint studies, quote, have yet to be evaluated by the medical community and the information presented may be erroneous. So this study compares individuals from three groups: those who have had COVID and recovered from it but are not vaccinated, those who have had COVID and recovered from it and are vaccinated, and those who have just been vaccinated. And its findings, remember it's early preprint, not peer-reviewed findings, are that so-called natural immunity is better than vaccine immunity alone. Better the so they come to this conclusion because they find more breakthrough cases reported from COVID tests in the vaccinated group than in the natural immunity group. So let's talk about a few ways a study like this might come to some incorrect or exaggerated conclusions. Firstly, there's the usual limitations. It only concerns one type of vaccine. It only concerns the Delta variant of COVID and so on. But I want to think about possible differences in behavior between the groups that were compared. As the study itself says, our results might be affected by differences between the groups in terms of health behaviors such as social distancing and mask wearing, a possible confounder that was not assessed. And another health behavior that might be as the findings of a study like this is willingness to get retested for COVID. Because this study is reporting results largely from voluntary tests for COVID. It's possible that individuals who are vaccinated are more conscious of the public health, more personally concerned about catching COVID and passing it on, and thus are more likely to get tested in the first place. Maybe people who have had COVID once and not bothered to get vaccinated are more likely to think that they don't have to bother with retesting for COVID either, since they've already had it. A lot of asymptomatic or mild cases of COVID might therefore be being missed in one group, but picked up in the other. And the study itself comments on the possibility of missing asymptomatic infections, saying additionally, as this is an observational real-world study where pre-screening was not performed by protocol, we might be underestimating asymptomatic infections, as these individuals often do not get tested. Also, if we attempt to use this study to dissuade vaccination, we commit a different type of sampling error, because in terms of whether or not you should get vaccinated, the groups being compared by the study are not fit for purpose. The study defines one group as previously infected individuals who have not been vaccinated. But for our purposes here, this isn't accurate. The group is actually previously infected individuals who have not been vaccinated and survived catching COVID the first time. If you follow. If you wanting to know if you should get vaccinated, this group is not a fair comparison to the vaccinated group because it's excluding those who caught COVID and did not recover. The individuals in this group have been filtered already. They've had to pass a relevant health check. That being, if you get COVID, will you and therefore not be able to be retested in the future. Those at most risk if they catch COVID, the people least likely to have asymptomatic cases, the people most likely to end up hospitalized, they've been excluded from this sample already. You can't compare these two groups by saying, look, the unvaccinated people are healthier, so get vaccinated, because you're not counting all the unvaccinated people who aren't around to get retested. Now, did these possible biasing factors actually influence the results of this study? Well, I don't know, honestly. It's a preprint study. It hasn't been peer-reviewed. But to be clear here, the study not being peer-reviewed yet doesn't mean it's wrong, necessarily. Preprint studies can be very useful, but what we can't do is say with any degree of certainty that it is correct. I wouldn't put life or my health on it being correct, and nor should anybody else. But for the sake of the argument, let's imagine this study is entirely correct. Now, what would it mean if this study was entirely correct? Well, what it would mean is that if you aren't vaccinated, you should go and get vaccinated as soon as possible. Because the study didn't just compare people with natural immunity to people with vaccine immunity, it also looked at people who have both. And it found that people with both have the best protection. You don't even have to read the whole study to find this out. They put it right there in the conclusions. Individuals who were both previously infected and given a single dose of the vaccine gained additional protection against the Delta variant. Max Blumenthal makes it sound like this is an either-or situation. Either you have natural immunity, or you have vaccine immunity, and you can only have one. But this isn't how it works. You can both have caught COVID and gotten vaccinated. And this paper, even if it's right, comes to the conclusion that being vaccinated gives you additional protection. So why didn't Blumenthal tweet bombshell study shows being vaccinated gives additional protection against the Delta variant? Why vax people with natural immunity? Ask Blumenthal and Jimmy Dore. Well, I don't know. How about you actually read the paper that you cite in your video? That might be asking a bit much, though, on YouTube. Thanks a lot for watching today, folks. But before I go, a general disclaimer. Please do not take medical advice from YouTube videos, particularly a ranty comedian's YouTube videos. As a YouTuber myself, I know hundreds of different ways that we can manipulate facts, present-based narratives, and just lie to you and get paid doing it. You don't even have to be that sneaky. 99 of your audience will never go and confirm anything you say. You can just lie on here. There are no checks. We are bound to the truth by zero regulations. As long as we don't literally break the law, we can tell you anything we want with zero repercussions. And this goes for me, too, of course. All I can do is relay to you that medical experts and medical institutions overwhelmingly advise vaccination against COVID-19. And I would ask that if you are not vaccinated yet, you go and confirm that information, and so long as you are able, get vaccinated. Jimmy Dore likes to say that everyone will get COVID eventually, and in preparation for that, please get vaccinated. You are much less likely to end up hospitalized, and you are much less likely to end up dead from catching COVID-19 if you are vaccinated. It's vastly safer, not just for you personally, but also for anyone you interact with. And for those who don't like needles, I completely understand. I don't like them either. But I've had 2 COVID-19 jabs so far, and I honestly didn't even feel either one of them. And that's not because I'm so tough. By the way, I have a very low threshold for pain. Oh, a very low threshold I have a very low Thank you, as always, to me patrons, who are lovely and should be scrolling by right now. I'll leave a link to me Patreon in the video description if you'd like to check it out. Right, that's all from me today, folks. I'll see you next time.